A woman of my word. Good morning. Welcome to the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners and our budget work session number 5. Today's meeting is a hybrid board meeting. Some presenters and guests will appear in person and some will appear virtually. As a reminder, for those who are presenting virtually, please mute your mic when you're not speaking, and don't forget to turn your mic on and your camera on when you begin. Our first presentation this morning is from the County Auditor's Office. Good morning.
Good morning. It's nice to be with you all, some of you in person, some of you remotely. I'm Jennifer McGurk, the County Auditor, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm pleased to talk with you this morning about my office work so far this fiscal year, as well as our proposed budget for 2023. I want to start by thanking Christian Elkin and Aaron Russell in the Budget Office for their support through this process. Next slide, please. As shown on this slide, the auditor is elected on a countywide basis, and my office's mission is to ensure that Multnomah County government is efficient, effective, equitable, transparent, and fully accountable to all who live in our county. Next slide. The way we approach our work is grounded in adherence to generally accepted government auditing standards. We prioritize our responsibility to serve the public interest. We act in integrity and adhere to high ethical standards. We use an equity lens and a trauma-informed approach. Next slide. The county charter states that the auditor is to conduct performance audits of all county operations and financial affairs. We serve our accountability function primarily by conducting performance audits and overseeing the Good Government Hotline, which is the Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Hotline. Next slide. Charter also requires the auditor to appoint a salary commission by January 1st of each even year. The salary commission started meeting in January and has completed their work to set the salaries for the chair, commissioners, and sheriff, and to set the county supplement for the district attorney. I really appreciated that all of the county's elected officials took time to meet with the commission, and I'm extremely grateful to the salary commissioners for their voluntary service. The charter also directs my office to apportion commissioner districts based on the U.S. Census, which we completed earlier this fiscal year. I want to thank the board for their support of my office's outreach during the process and for your work to review and adopt the proposed boundary revisions. My office also has an assignment from County Code, which is to support the Board of County Commissioners Audit Committee, which is a liaison to you, to the external auditor, and to management for the external financial audit required under Oregon law. Next slide. Our audits provide systems-level accountability to the public, and as shown on this slide, during each audit, we conduct interviews, research, data analysis, and observations. We examine a program, process, or service, and make recommendations for improvement. Our audits are focused on describing how a program operates in areas that need change. We pay particular attention for opportunities to improve accountability, transparency, and equity. For example, each audit includes at least one recommendation related to supporting racial equity. Next slide, please. We also provide issue-specific accountability through the hotline to provide county employees and community members with a confidential method for reporting suspected fraud, waste, or abuse of position. As shown on this slide, we prioritize confidentiality. People can make reports anonymously, but even if they don't, we protect reporter confidentiality to the fullest legal extent, and we investigate all reports involving fraud, waste, and abuse of position in county government that come to our office. The hotline is critical because it helps prevent financial losses of the county operations that we all pay for. Hotlines are the #1 way organizations find out about potential fraud, waste, and abuse of position. The hotline also provides our office with a sense of community member and employee concerns, which informs our audit choices, particularly related to equity within county operations and the overall transparency of county operations. Next slide, please. My team and I have been busy this fiscal year, and I wanted to take a moment to share some of the highlights of our work. On this slide is an image from our largely positive report about how the county had spent pandemic funds, noting that the county seemed to do so in alignment with its stated commitment to leading with race. Next slide. This slide shows the exterior of the Justice Center, which houses the Multnomah County Detention Center, as well as the exterior of Inverness Jail. This fiscal year, my office issued an audit of county jail conditions, where we found that conditions were worse for Black adults in custody and for adults in custody with mental health conditions. Next slide, please. And this slide has an image from our audit of the county's financial condition. This is a recurring audit we do every 2 years to provide information to the board and to the public about the county's ongoing fiscal position. Next slide. We also conducted a great deal of public outreach and worked with internal GIS and other experts to develop a plan for Commissioner District redistricting. On the left is an image of the new districts. Thank you for approving the plan in January. The other images on this slide are from our annual report on the Good Government Hotlines operation and on our office's work for calendar year 2021. Next slide. We've also issued 4 reports on the status of recommendations. We conducted 2 updates covering recommendations from our audit of the county's response to the pandemic. The 3rd status update covered recommendations from our 2019 audit of primary care clinics, and our 4th was on our 2019 audit of the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Services Division. In general, we're seeing good progress in implementing recommendations. In addition, we issued a memo about how the Joint Office of Homeless Services could be more transparent in its reporting to the public. Next slide, please. I am pleased that Chair Kafori has included 2 out-of-target program offers in the proposed budget for my office. The first out-of-target offer is a one-time only request for $100,000 so that my office can conduct a competitive procurement process and purchase an audit management system. As you know, for each audit, we gather and document hundreds of pieces of evidence, including documenting information gathered through interviews and observations, documenting conditions via photographs, conducting data analyses, and gathering information about laws, data sets, program created plans, and other items. Next slide, please. To ensure that the evidence provides a reasonable basis for our findings and conclusions, for each audit, we conduct a comprehensive fact-checking process to ensure that each statement we make is backed up by evidence and accurately reflects that evidence. In addition, I annually conduct a review of office work products for compliance with the standards. And every 3 years, outside government auditors conduct an independent peer review of our office for compliance with the standards. Maintaining audit documents in a way that facilitates these various quality reviews has largely been a very tedious manual process. Next slide, please. The audit industry standard is to maintain these documents through an audit management system because they support compliance with standards and improve efficiency. Rather than spending hours on document management, auditors can focus on auditing and analysis. With this program offer, we will engage in a public procurement process to obtain an audit management system that will help ensure compliance with standards, support efficiency and transparent processes, and automate workflows. I appreciate that Chair Kafori has included this one-time only purchase in her proposed budget. Next slide, please. Since the 1990s, the Auditor's Office has had 9 staff members. And while the Auditor's Office hadn't grown during that period, the rest of the county has. The number of county employees has grown 15% since 2014, for example. And as you know, these employees are doing really critical work. They're providing direct services, they're setting up new programs like Preschool for All, and they're doing one-time lasting work like making the Burnside Bridge earthquake ready or allocating millions of dollars in pandemic-related funds. For all of these programs and projects, there are chances to learn from what we're doing, celebrate what's good, and envision ways of serving people better. Audits are a critical tool for this learning process, but as the county has been growing in capacity and responsibility, the Auditor's Office has not kept pace. And so we haven't had the capacity to provide the service the county deserves. Next slide, please. So I am pleased that Chair Kafori's proposed budget includes funding to expand my office's audit capacity. This additional staffing will enable my office to better ensure transparent, accountable, and equitable government. This program offer will enable the Auditor's Office to bring on 4 auditors. This will mean that one of our current auditors, who's been splitting their time between audits and the hotline will be able to work full-time on the hotline. It also means we can start establishing audit teams. We'll start with a team for public safety and one for human services. New hires will be onboarded through curricula that orients them to the office, to the county, and to government auditing as needed. Each new hire will be assigned to a team, have an in-office mentor, and regular one-on-one time with me. And to provide a preview for the future budget cycle, per Chair Kafori's direction, my program offers for fiscal year 2024 will include a second phase of capacity expansion with a proposal to request 5 more auditors for the office. The inclusion of the audit capacity expansion program offer in Chair Kafori's proposed budget is a great development for my office and for the public. This is the first time since the 1990s that the size of the auditor's office will grow. While we still won't have the capacity needed to provide the service implied in the charter, which is to audit all financial affairs and operations, we are definitely getting closer. Next slide, please. This slide shows the proposed fiscal year 23 budget for my office with our ongoing service level and the capacity expansion. Program offers A and C. Program offer B is not shown. That is the program offer of $100,000 to purchase the audit management system and is one time only. Due to the retirement of a long-serving staff auditor, my office's budget should be able to absorb ongoing costs of the audit management system. The largest line item in our budget is for personnel, and the next major line item is of about $184,000, and that's for the majority of fees associated with the state-required annual external financial audit. My office is not the client for this contract, but we hold it to ensure the audit's integrity. We also receive funding to ensure my staff can receive ongoing training that is required to comply with county charter. Once again, my office will be growing from 7 to 11 staff auditors. My team and I are excited to bring on new auditors and expand the work we do to support accountable, equitable, and transparent government on behalf of all who live in our county. Next slide, please. As we bring on new staff and audit programs, we will continue to be dedicated to working in ways that support the county's stated commitment to leading with racial equity, or commitment to racial equity. My office is focused on 3 areas of the Workforce Equity Strategic Plan, and I'm happy to give this update. This slide describes WESP's minimum standard that all managers will have a minimum of 4 hours of training per year related to intercultural communication and racially just practice. We continue to exceed this standard. For example, my team recently participated in a training on social equity in local government, and many of us attended the Northwest Public Employees Diversity Conference this past fall. Other training that informs our work has included courses in supporting under-resourced populations through performance auditing and centering racial equity in auditing. Next slide. Another area we've committed to is providing exposure to government auditing and government work by initiating a formalized internship program. In fiscal year 21, we hosted 2 BIPOC interns from immigrant communities who participated in important audits. Each intern earned 6 college credits as well as a small stipend. This summer, the auditor's office will be able to participate in the College to County program thanks to some centralized funding. My office is really excited about this, and we look forward to working with our intern. We also revamped our hiring processes in alignment with the county's minimum qualifications program and have emphasized hiring individuals with diversity, equity, and inclusion expertise. Next slide, please. The third area we have focused on with respect to the Workforce Equity Strategic Plan is related to improving our practices. Next slide. We've built an equity lens into our audit work. This tool helps us identify stakeholders and continually keep them in mind, and to keep in mind the people, places, processes, and kinds of power occurring with regard to a particular issue or decision. From the beginning of our process, we strive to include people affected by the issue we're auditing through one-on-one interviews, focus groups, surveys, and other tools, using a trauma-informed approach. This enables stakeholders to participate in shaping audit objectives and scope. Our approach also strives to mitigate barriers to participation that community members may face, such as the need to communicate in languages other than English and the need for childcare. And we will report back to the people we learn from about how their knowledge informed our audit objectives, recommendations, and reports. Next slide. With our audit of COVID-19 contact tracing, which we're wrapping up now, we piloted a trauma-informed approach to auditing. That approach now informs all of our work. Earlier this month, staff auditors Caroline Zavitkovsky, Dorian Pacheco, and Mandy Hood presented at our Professionals Annual National Conference on how to integrate trauma-informed approaches into auditing. Next slide, please. The final update I'd like to provide relating to improving our practices is about my office's Community Advisory Committee, which is now in its second year. This group provides suggestions and comments on the annual audit plan prior to its finalization, provides suggestions and guidance for the community engagement aspects of performance audits, and provides suggestions and guidance on the auditor's work to integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion concepts into our audits. Members include people who identify as LGBTQ+ and BIPOC. Participants in the committee help me ensure that my internal practices are addressing systemic barriers and that our audit processes are as well. Next slide. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions, comments? Start with Commissioner Chaipal.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, Auditor McGuirk. I don't have any questions. I just want to appreciate your office's work. I think the auditor's work of ensuring transparency and accountability is really vital, and appreciate the fact that you call out that it's about pointing out things that are being done well as places for improvement. And I think we all want to identify both of those. I also want to appreciate the chair for including the additional staffing for your office. I think it's necessary given the trends that you point out, and so very supportive of that. And I think that is it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Vega-Peterson. Oh, there you are.
There I am. Good morning, Auditor McGuirk. Thank you so much for this presentation. I don't have any questions either. I also am glad to see the additional FTE for your office as the county grows, so should the auditor's office, so that makes complete sense to me. I did just want to thank you and your team. I think over the last couple of years, you guys have had additional tasks above and beyond the normal work of the auditor's office of doing internal audits and the Good Governance Hotline with the big tasks of the redistricting as well as the Salary Commission. And I just want to commend you for taking on or for being able to do those other work so well while continuing to do the really necessary work that you do. So thank you.
Thank you. I hope you feel better.
Commissioner Stegman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Auditor McGuirk. And I was remiss for not congratulating you on your reelection as well. So congratulations.
Thank you.
You really just wanted to echo everything that's been said by my colleagues. Appreciate your office and your entire team and your leadership to ensure to the public that we are being good stewards of our money, of our people, and of our processes. And it's important that we have the auditor's office that can call out when we need to make improvements and also when we're doing a good job. So thank you so much.
Commissioner Myron.
Thank you. Thank you. So much, Auditor McGuirk. Government accountability is so crucial to reassuring the public they can trust their public officials and the decisions we make. And so your office, the auditor's office, is crucial to this work. And I really want to commend you and your team and your office for doing so much on what is really a shoestring. Your professionalism, your service has been exceptional, and you do just great work. I do have a couple of questions. I would be happy to talk more about these afterwards as well. One thing that I have found interesting that took me a while to sort of get this But we do have regular audits that show we are in good financial health. You do exceptional work in compliance, all of that, though we need much more capacity to do that work. But I think that is sort of a different question from how we are using our resources and whether we are sort of getting what we pay for, using those resources effectively for particular services. And so is there a distinction between that work and more of the compliance kind of technical questions of auditing? And if so, is that something your office does or could do with extra funding?
I think we do both. The financial condition audit, I would say, is more a look at the overall financial health, and it doesn't dig into those individual line items. When we're auditing a program, we definitely dig into those individual line items to at least give a line of sight as to where the funds are going. So I would say the other audit I referenced, where we looked at how the county spent pandemic-related funds, people can go to that audit website and they can look at who received the funds, categories of things funds went to, whether it was like PPE, housing support. So when we get into a specific audit, we definitely look at that and whether funds were allocated in line with the intentions that were set, if they were, and then we surveyed providers to see, was that effective for you? Were you able to help meet the needs? So we do try to get at those different angles as well. But it's usually more when we're looking at a specific program or spending area where we do that, look at effectiveness.
I guess in terms of, I think there's a lot of questions, or at least I've had a lot of questions and heard from constituents and others questions about contracting. And I know there was an audit for large contracts back in 2008, and then it was revisited a couple of times by Auditor March. And I think there were some really interesting, important, and kind of concerning findings there. And is there plans to follow up on that, or is there a way to follow up on that?
We look at contracts and contracting relationships with every audit. We wouldn't exactly follow up on that because we did not have Workday or the systems in place that we have now when those audits were conducted. So it's a very different framework in terms of the technology we're using. But certainly, so much of what the county does is done via contract that we would be remiss if we did not assess those relationships and the contract language with each audit we do.
Thank you. To look at, and we can talk about it offline, but to look at the systems, maybe you can help me understand where to look at that, the overarching contract systems.
Why don't we have a separate discussion? Because now that I'm in this role, I don't dig into, my staff dig into those systems and assess them.
And then the one other area, I really appreciate what you've sort of described in terms of your needs and how, and I support adding the capacity wholeheartedly. And then in terms of an ombudsperson, that seems like a very different need also than the good governance hotline. That's one of those things I came in thinking, oh, it's a good governance hotline. It's about anything people have about government, or they can share there. But it's another area that I think is more technical, and it's really about reports of fraud, waste, and abuse. The ombudsperson, would that be a broader conception of just connecting people with the work of the county, or if they have?
Yeah, I feel like that's a different conversation because that's not a part of this budget ask. Just really briefly, if someone's having trouble getting service through a government entity, often like the city of Portland a person could contact the ombudsman and
Right.
say, hey, I think that, and again, this is a city example because we don't have one. I think that there's lead paint everywhere in my neighborhood. And
Yeah.
the ombudsman could go and look at that specific situation and help find a remedy for that. So it's really about individual complaints people are having. Ombudsmen are supposed to be neutral and impartial. They're just trying to do fact finding. And if there is an issue to be resolved, recommend a solution. So, and then the hotline is really, for fraud, waste, and abusive position.
I just wanted to, okay, that's perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I don't have any questions. Thank you so much for coming this morning.
Thank you.
All right. You have anything else to add?
No, I just appreciate the questions and the time, and very looking forward to bringing on new folks. So thank you.
Thank you, Auditor McGurk. Our next presentation is from the District Attorney's Office. DA Schmidt, come on down. And your team.
A treat to be in person. Chair Kafori, members of the commission, it's so good to see you here today. So before we dive into our presentation, I would be remiss, some of you know, I know Chair, you know, my budget director decided that to take a new job about a month ago. And so I have Steve Robbins here with me today, himself, but I have to call out Christian Elkin and Althea Gregory for all of their incredible help in helping us not only actually input information into our presentation for us and help us find numbers, but just being willing to nonstop answer the phone, answer our questions at any time. So a great deal of thanks to your staff. All right. So I'm Mike Schmidt, Multnomah County District Attorney. To my right is my interim budget director.
Chair Kafori, members of the commission, my name is Steve Robbins. I'm currently the interim finance director for MCDA.
And to my left.
Good morning. My name is Wayne Graham. I serve on the CBAC for the district attorney.
All right, let's advance the slide and dive in. So just an overview slide. I don't have to go through this, but we'll start off by hearing from Wayne on our CBAC about the Budget Advisory Committee's recommendations to all of you. And then we will go through the PowerPoint from there. So please advance the slide.
Thanks, Mike. CBAC met numerous times. We have a diverse group of people from all walks of life. This was my first year serving on a CBAC. I came from the corporate world where I served as CEO of a large industrial manufacturer on Swan Island. So it was an eye-opening experience to be part of the process and see good public servants working through a budget process to do the right things. Next slide, please. A lot of detail in this slide. I'll just take a minute for people to look at it. I think we know the current state of affairs. We don't need to talk about that much in terms of high crime rates. The COVID case backlog is significant. Mike and his team have implemented dashboards. As a member of the CBAC community, having those dashboard and having access to a broad array of information in a very transparent format is very helpful in terms of understanding the best way to allocate resources and how to get outcomes based upon those allocations. The last bullet point is probably the most important bullet point in this slide, which was the amount of outreach that's going on with the local community. Crime isn't something that's spread out evenly. It's disproportionately impacted. And as a leader in the corporate world, I've learned a long time ago that how you drive change is going to where the work is. And we had a lot of substantive conversations about that part of what Mike and his team are doing and how that impacts the overall outcomes based upon that level of spending. Next slide. So the CBAC made a series of recommendations, and thankfully, and we appreciate that some of those have been included in the proposed budget. The one recommendation, which is actually the most substantive recommendation of the CBAC, is not in the budget, and that is the MAP program. We recommended in our letter to the commission. The Central CBAC also mentioned this program. The Central CBAC did not have a lot of programs that it mentioned, but it did call this one out specifically. And I want to just take a minute to reinforce how meaningful we believe that program is. In my own background, having somebody like Mike saying, I don't want to just tackle the problem incrementally. I want to do it in a way that creates an investment and lasting change was a refreshing sort of approach to tackle the problem. And we'd ask for some reconsideration to at least get that program started and show that we can build trust and we could deliver good outcomes in the community that would make a difference. As a member of this CBAC and the Central CBAC and a taxpayer, I just close by asking that that program somehow make it back into the budget. Thank you.
Okay, next slide. Thank you, Wayne.
First, yeah, I just want to, before you turn it back over, we want to thank you and your committee for all the work that you do on the CBAC. It's really important for us to hear from you, to have your involvement. And I know it takes a lot of time on your part. So we just want to thank you very much for your service.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the budget approach, through direction and encouragement through the budget office, we started, like probably every agency, examining our budget and the way that we prioritize investments and resources through that equity lens. And I'll talk more about that in the next slide. But as Wayne has already kind of touched on some of the themes, we all know right now, and there has been for some time, it's been brewing, a challenge with community trust in the public safety system. And so restoring community trust is front and center to our budget asks and the way we allocate resources. We also know that Multnomah County and the city of Portland are experiencing an increase in gun violence that we have not seen in decades. And I will continue to thank the board for its investment in our office, adding gun prosecutors to help us respond to that gun violence. And of course, that continues to be a big resource driver for what we need. Caseloads. As we emerge from the pandemic, caseloads across the deputies are increased in some units by as much as 300%. They have tripled in size from where they were pre-pandemic. I can tell you, I used to be a deputy district attorney in this office on the front lines in property crimes. I remember when my boss told me never to have a caseload above 80. I just looked at our monthly memos of my property crime prosecutors. They're pushing caseloads around 200. It's not tenable. And of course, the other big thing that is coming towards earth for us is body-worn cameras and the Portland Police Bureau adopting that technology. And you'll hear more about that as we go through. But as we approached our budget, those were some of the big considerations and concerns that we put in. So next slide, please. So first of all, how did we apply an equity lens? I want to start off by addressing something that Wayne brought up. We really put an emphasis, myself personally and members of my staff, of getting out to the community and talking to community groups. I have a list in front of me of 15 community groups that we sat down with, spoke with, discussed priorities, listened to what they are hearing from their membership. And these groups span from Unite Oregon and Apano, Rosewood Initiative, the Muslim Advisory Council, to other community-based organizations, Coalition of Communities of Color, Basic Right Oregon, but also labor organizations, talking to labor organizations about our wage theft, our focus on looking at wage theft prosecutions, the Northwest Carpenters Union, business organizations, chambers of commerce, Business for a Better Portland, Portland Business Alliance. So we really took a lot of time to listen to the concerns of a diverse group of stakeholders and respond to what they're saying and incorporate a lot of their feedback into our budget requests. So starting with that equity lens, we thought it was important to really do something that I think this office has not done traditionally. And so that was a rich experience for myself and my staff. So as we went through our policy recommendations, of course, looking at how do we build trust? Well, you got to reduce disparate impacts. We heard that over and over from groups that we spoke with. I mentioned wage theft prosecution. I had a young man come into my office and tell me about 20 or so workers, many of whom were undocumented, that were not paid for 6 weeks worth of labor, and that there was really no place for them to turn except for maybe a civil attorney that may or may not take their case. That's not acceptable. You should not be able to not pay workers for the work that they are doing. And you all understand how that ripples out through communities. Looking at past decisions. And I know some of you were able to attend a Justice Integrity Unit, our very first resentencing hearing ever. And so we will talk a little bit more about that, but looking at how we have done things in the past and trying to see how we can move forward to build trust with communities. And then, of course, obviously, top of mind for all of us is disrupting violence in our community. And especially, we all know the stats and figures, but it hits our BIPOC community harder than anybody else. And so prioritizing our resources to focus on gun violence in our community. Next slide, please. How do we incorporate the WESP, the Workforce Equity Strategic Plan? Well, I'm very excited that the chair included in her budget proposal a funded equity leadership position in our office. It's been a position that's been sorely missing, and I can tell you that we will benefit greatly from it because we've been doing the work internally, but it's been being done by people essentially on their free time who are volunteering to be on a committee and carry that work forward. To have a position whose job it is to make sure that we're incorporating equity in every decision that we make will be a huge benefit to our office, both for attracting more diverse candidates and retaining those candidates. And we have some measures on how we've looked at diversity in our office on our website. Next slide, please. So organizational chart kind of lays out how the presentation will go. I've got members from my office who work in each of these divisions. And like last year, I got a lot of positive feedback from our presentation because it wasn't just the people who oversee these divisions, but the people who are on the front lines doing work to really give you an idea and a sense of what it is like for them. Obviously, as the district attorney, I oversee the administrative division, which houses all the operational and leadership functions of the office, including our Justice Integrity Unit and Research and Planning. And then we'll walk through each of the divisions and each of the discrete units that they oversee as we go through the presentation. Next slide, please. So overall, the budget by fund and also what the chair's recommended budget is to increase our general fund budget. And the federal budget will stay relatively similar. The COVID funds will also stay relatively flat, but that's because you increased them mid-fiscal year last year. So it looks like a bigger change from where last year's budget. Next slide, please. Here's the 5-year trend of significant funds that you can see how our budget has grown over the last 5 years. Thanks again to Althea for helping us gather all this data and input it into our slides. Next slide, please. You can see here looking at our employees, our FTE, that we were in a little bit of a trough from 2019 to 2023, and we're back. This proposed budget has us essentially back to where we were in 2019. And so that's a good thing. Of course, we'd like to see that continue. Next slide, please. It won't be a surprise to you, this pie, the biggest part of the pie for us is personnel services. That's really our driving cost is the labor that does the work. So next slide, please. Okay, now we'll jump into the divisions. Next slide, please. So overall, the way our office is split up into these 5 divisions, this shows you a good sense of the funding of each of those, and we'll walk through them individually. Next slide, please. So the administration division. What is being proposed in the chair's budget, as I've already referenced, is to add an equity and inclusion manager. We had a budget reallocation for some IT infrastructure work that we needed to do and continues to need to do. That's a big challenge for our agency. And making our Justice Integrity Unit, which was a pilot that you all agreed to pilot last time, making that ongoing funding. So those are the big changes that are in the chair's proposed budget in this division. Next slide, please. To give you a sense of what some of those things are accomplishing, our Justice Integrity Unit has reviewed 266 clemency petitions. We are experiencing quite a lot of clemency petitions from our governor right now. We've reviewed 301 different applications, many of them pursuant to the new legislation, which is the resentencing legislation, asking us to look at anything from claims of innocence, collateral consequences of people's convictions, and excessive sentences that they received. And another thing that you'll see on the next slide represented graphically is the increase in the expungements that we are experiencing. I didn't mean to jump ahead quite yet, but thank you. Which is up dramatically. And that's also due to a law change at the legislature, which is a good thing because a lot of people are getting their records expunged. It's also a resource challenge because we have to look at every single one of those applications, reach out to the victims, contact them, see if they'd like a hearing, and if they would like a hearing, appear with them. So that is a big work driver for our agency. Information technology, you all are aware of this because we've been talking about it since I got into this chair. But the systems in our office are old. They're failing on a regular basis. We're working on that. And a big shout out to the folks in the county who do the IT work. And I think that we have forged a relationship that my office and the county have not had in the past. And that's a really positive thing for us. And so I really am very appreciative of the work that Tracy and her team are doing in helping us. But we know that we have to become paperless. We know that we have to have electronic discovery. Multnomah County District Attorney's Office is lagging the rest of the state. I went to Yamhill County and toured their county. They went paperless over a decade ago.
Don't say that.
So we have a lot of work to do, and we're getting there, and we're making progress. But maintaining the failing systems is a huge challenge for our office, and it's one that's taking a lot of resources as we are still working towards building and fixing. And then research and planning. What you will see through this presentation, every slide that shows you data is not a slide that I prepared specifically for this budget presentation. It is a screenshot of a dashboard that is publicly available on our website. That is such a change, and it makes us one of the most transparent district attorney's offices in the country. We join about 5 offices that have implemented what we're calling the prosecutorial index dashboards, the Ppi Dashboards. And so we are real leaders in this area, and it's been a really great benefit, not only for working with our CBAC, working for community, working with media who has inquiries about whether or not we're prosecuting crime. It's all there publicly for people to see. And so as we go through this presentation, you'll see evidence of that. Next slide. And so this is just an illustration of what we see with our expungements. The blue, green, and yellow lines represent the total number of expungements we saw in the previous 3 years. The red line, of course, we're only in through April in terms of our data tracking so far. But you can see the trajectory that we're on. We don't expect it to abate. Expungements have increased, like I said in the first slide, 500%. We anticipate by the end of this year, we will have done near 12,000. Our previous record was 2,500. So that's a massive increase and driver of resources. Next slide, please. So I'd like to now call Kelly Rhodes to the stand. Such a prosecutor. To join me up here at the dais to tell you what it's like to be the head of our new Justice Integrity Unit.
Chair Kafori, Commissioners, good morning and thank you for having me. I'm Kelly Rhodes. I'm head of our Justice Integrity Unit. I've been in the office for just under 13 years and have spent the majority of my time prosecuting violent person felonies. So this was a little bit of a different role for me when I took it over. Today, I want to talk to you about hope. This is not a word many associate with the criminal justice system. The work of the Justice Integrity Unit helps to bring hope to those whose lives have previously intersected with this system. Hope that they can move forward, hope that they will no longer be labeled a criminal, hope that society will someday accept them back as equals. About a month ago, my team got to walk into a courtroom and make one man's hope a reality. This was a historic moment for Multnomah County, an unimaginable turning point in his life, and a true moment of humanity. A moment I will not soon forget, and a moment I know two of you were able to witness for yourselves. In the early 2000s, this man shot at and struck a rival gang member in the leg as retaliation for a previous shooting. He was ultimately tried and convicted of numerous person felonies, spending about 13 years in prison. After his release, he worked tirelessly to better himself. He started his own electrician business, currently mentors high-risk and gang-involved youth, and has become a pillar of his community, even serving on Governor Brown's Racial Justice Council. But he was held back by his felony convictions, either being denied contracts or offered lower payment due to his felony status. And he and his family also struggled with housing as a result. In the courtroom that day, he spoke about the impact of the system on him and his community. I'd like to read you a portion of his statement. My whole life, I was warned that the system sought to destroy me, that it was created to oppress my community. I believe in a way that this built-in hate for the system and its hate for me became a self-fulfilling prophecy, and at the age of 18, I became a part of the system. After 13 years of incarceration and nearly 20 years in the system, I could never imagine standing here with my friends and family with the opportunity to clear this off of my record. I could never imagine a DA's office that would stand with me and advocate on my behalf. I am humbled that I will be the first of many in Multnomah County to be impacted by the decision of a few people. Senate Bill 819, which is the resentencing law, is an amazing first step to right the wrongs of the system and redeem people like myself back to their community. After today, every aspect of my life, my children's lives, my family's life will never be the same. Thank you for this moment and this opportunity, and I will be grateful to everybody that's here. During that hearing, he took full responsibility for the harm that he caused to the victim in his case. He even acknowledged that his actions may have led the victim down a path that ultimately caused the victim even greater harm. The interesting part and the emotional part was that the victim's sister listened to his statement, unsure of whether or not she was actually going to oppose or support his request. And after hearing his statement, she not only supported his request, but she actually forgave him for the harm that he had caused her brother. The feeling in the courtroom that day was overwhelming. There was clapping, crying, and cheering. These aren't sounds that are typical for a courtroom, and it was truly moving. I became a prosecutor because I wanted to help people, not only to assist those who had been victimized, but to help those whose lives had gone off track to get back on track. Throughout my career, I've helped many victims, but I couldn't have told you whether or not I'd had a positive impact on those who I've prosecuted. And now I get to say that I definitely have. The Justice Integrity Unit is comprised of 4 deputy district attorneys, a victim's advocate, an investigator, and an administrative assistant. Our primary workload consists of the following: collateral consequence cases, like the one I spoke about above. These are cases in which individuals are experiencing significant consequences as a result of their non-expungible convictions. Excessive sentencing claims, where we investigate sentences for individuals who are still in custody to determine if their sentences were excessive and then work to correct any disproportionalities. Actual and constructive innocence claims. These investigations either seek to determine whether an individual was actually innocent of a crime or whether there was a miscarriage of justice such that the integrity of the conviction does not hold up. Additionally, we review clemency cases, conducting investigations into whether or not we should support a clemency petition that has been submitted to the governor's office. And finally, expungements, where we help eligible individuals to move forward with their lives by setting aside their convictions as well. I want to say thank you for your time today. However, I want to especially thank you for recognizing the importance of this work. It is a truly critical piece that has historically been missing from our criminal justice system. Thank you.
I had to witness that hearing from home, like some of our commissioners today, because I was sick at the time. It was something going around. I don't remember, but it was bad. You know, that it shook me up then. I also heard Kelly give this. We prepared yesterday and we talked about it, and I still got goosebumps sitting here and listening to it one more time. So thank you, Kelly. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's the administrative division where the Justice Integrity Unit sits. Division 1, the only funding changes in this tied to this division are inflationary, but I just wanted to call out the units in the division for purposes of talking. It oversees the juvenile unit, the domestic violence unit, our support enforcement division, and our misdemeanor trial unit. Next slide, please. So from our dashboard, this is, I think, good news. You all previously with the ARPA dollars supported adding an additional prosecutor to our domestic violence unit. And an astute question from your staff was, what's the impact been to that? And so I looked at the data, and what we saw was that of all of the units where we've seen increases consistent with looking at the number of open cases at the end of the month. That's what we're tracking here, is essentially, are those caseloads getting bigger or not? And you can see the inflection point in our domestic violence unit. I think that adding that resource was a big reason for that inflection point. It not only spreads out the workload across my staff who have higher caseloads than they've ever carried before, but it allows them to pay more attention to individual cases. And when we can pay more attention to individual cases, we can resolve those cases more expeditiously. And so thank you for your support of adding that prosecutor to that unit. Of course, the caseloads are still double what they normally would be, but without your support, I know that that line would have continued to increase instead of to started to abate. Next slide, please. So significant program changes, looking at the 3 units we called out here. Our juvenile unit, you're going to hear from my senior deputy district attorney in charge of the juvenile unit, Lori Fellows. But the juvenile unit, like many units in my office, has not been immune from the increase in violent crime in our community. And in fact, Lori will talk to you about how we handle those cases and how that has impacted her staff. Our misdemeanor trial unit also experiencing significant caseload increases due to backlogs in the courts, but I'm happy to report that the courts are opening back up. We've been in trial. In fact, we're frequently in trial these days, and that's a really good thing because that means we're starting to really chip away and resolve cases.
Everyone I know is getting called for jury duty.
Yeah.
It is crazy. Everyone's getting COVID and everyone's getting called for jury duty.
Yeah, including, I understand, former Chief Deputy Chuck Sparks is currently serving on a jury. So, and then finally, our support enforcement division. I'm excited to talk to you, just briefly mention this. We'll see, we're very hopeful about this, but we're trying a new model of support enforcement where we're trying to model what we've learned from drug courts. We know that people who struggle to pay child support oftentimes have underlying conditions that make that struggle the reality. And those things are the same things that we see in the criminal system: their addiction, their mental health, their trauma. And so we're trying to take a new approach overseen by Senior Deputy DA Betty Yada to see if we can help incentivize and get at some of the underlying causes to drive up the support that we can have for children and families in our community. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to ask Senior Deputy District Attorney Lori Fellows to come up and tell you a little bit about what it's like to oversee our juvenile unit.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Chair Kafori and Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to allow me to highlight the work that our juvenile unit is doing. I don't know if you know, but the Juvenile Court of Multnomah County started in June of 1905. The first youth to appear was on June 10th, and it was 12-year-old Oliver. Oliver was accused of being a truant and a bad boy. We've come a long ways in 117 years. The day-to-day functioning of our unit is to prosecute delinquent acts. We screen referrals that come in from the police. We have an interagency agreement with the juvenile department. We return cases to them for informal handling when appropriate. And we prosecute the other cases that come in. I'm going to talk a little bit about some statistics. You will not find these on the MCA dashboard. Juveniles have a lot of confidentiality rights, and I pulled my statistics from the Juvenile Services Division for today. Referrals have decreased significantly the last 10 years, particularly misdemeanor referrals. But some referrals have not. In 20 and 21, we've seen a 20% increase in firearm referrals, and we've seen for the same time frame a 10% increase in robbery referrals. As I'm sure you're aware, in 2020, the legislature had enacted Senate Bill 1008. What that did was take cases of 15 to 17-year-olds that had been subjected to Measure 11 and returned them to juvenile court. They were no longer automatically treated as adults. That has increased our workload significantly. We have, as of May of this year, we have reviewed 261 Senate Bill 1008 cases since January of 2020. That encompassed 208 youth individually. Some youth came in on more than one referral. We know complainant or dismissed 102 of those cases. We filed 21 waiver motions. Waiver is a process by which we can ask the juvenile court to take a youth and send them to the adult side. We resolved 3 of those cases as adult cases with pleas, and we withdrew 13 of those waiver motions. We currently have 5 pending. The waiver process, which is set out in statute, is a very complicated process, and it raises a lot of questions about what is appropriate for an individual youth and for the community. We spend a lot of time staffing those cases. We make initial determinations as if we think a waiver is likely to be appropriate. We'll file the motion as we have in 21 cases. But then we'll revisit the issue after their evaluations, after we have more information. And on at least 13 of those occasions, we have chosen to withdraw the waiver motion because we made the ultimate decision once we had more information that that was not the appropriate way to proceed for that youth. They're complicated issues. Most of these motions are being filed on homicide cases or cases with significant injuries, a lot of firearm issues. So we spend a lot of time, and we spend a lot of DA Schmidt's time reviewing those cases to make the right decisions. In addition to the work we do, Multnomah County juvenile system has had a history of significant reform dating back over 30 years. That's when we first started with the Annie Casey Foundation and the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative. We continue to be involved in that work, and we, in fact, are one of their model sites. We've also worked with the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform out of Georgetown University and a number of certification programs. We're currently involved with the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform and the Annie Casey Foundation in a project called Transforming Juvenile Probation. It's a program with system partners, the bench, the Juvenile Services Division, community partners, our office, the defense, and a wide range of people. And we're looking at issues of how to increase our use of diversion. And currently we're focusing on conditions of probation. You know, most kids get put on probation, you get handed a list of things you're not supposed to do. And what we're trying to do and what the research currently suggests is that you really need to tailor those conditions specifically to the needs of the youth that are involved. So it's those sort of reform efforts we continue to involve ourselves with. The reforms over the years have made significant improvements in our system. We have significantly reduced in the last 30 years the population in our detention facilities by finding alternatives to detention. We've implemented a crossover youth practice model. We're involved with the Community Healing Initiative Early Intervention Program, and we've recently started an enhanced diversion program. During my 32 years with MCDA, I have served under 3 elected district attorneys. The first 9 years of my career, I had the usual progression from misdemeanor to felonies, but had the opportunity to spend time at juvenile court. I then spent 14 and a half years in our child abuse team, prosecuting arguably the worst of the worst. And in 2013, I had the opportunity to become a senior deputy. And I asked at that time to be assigned to juvenile court. And I did that because after 23 years in the office, I felt it was a place we could make the most difference. If you take a youth who is struggling and give them the support and the supervision and the services that they need, you have the best chance of redirecting their path. You have the best chance of keeping that youth out of the adult system. That's what we strive for every day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Next slide, please. In our next division, Division 2, you can see that this is the division where technically in the budget, the chair is proposing adding 6 FTE for the increase in body-worn camera footage coming on. And this is actually not even the increase in body-worn camera footage. This increase would allow us to review all of the body-worn camera footage we're getting from Gresham and the Port of Portland. This currently we're reviewing somewhere around 30% of all of the body-worn camera footage that we receive. This increase brings us up to what we anticipate to be in the 90s and near 100% of being able to review. That is necessary, of course, in anticipation that the Portland Police will come online with body-worn camera in the next fiscal year, potentially. So this gets us up to speed with what we currently have. The other units overseen in this division are the pretrial unit, our strategic prosecution unit, and you'll hear from Senior Deputy District Attorney Nathan Vasquez here in a minute, and our Unit C, which handles also handles a lot of gun violence cases in our office. Next slide, please. So focusing on gun violence, and Nathan will give you an insight into his work in strategic prosecution, but I know this is a little bit small, but it is, again, a slide from our website that you can look at, and it really just shows you the high-level trends of the number of cases and the volume of cases that our office is handling related to gun violence. And you can see year over year from 2019, 2020, 21, and unfortunately, even in 2022, we continue to be on pace for those numbers to increase. Next slide, please. So now Nathan Vasquez is going to come up and talk to you about his work in the strategic prosecution unit, handling some of the most high profile and important cases, especially important to our community. Nathan?
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair Kafoury. To the Commission. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to speak with you. I'm going to talk to you about the 3 kind of core areas that my unit handles. And I'll start, of course, with what is our kind of primary function, which we call high volume system users. And really at the heart of strategic prosecution, what we talk about is using data to identify individuals that are having the highest impact on the community. And with my unit, what we particularly strive for is this goal of what we call getting to zero. And the idea is that we want to take someone who may have hundreds of contacts with law enforcement, paramedics, fire, and then change that to a situation where they are no longer impacting the system. And while an easy way to say that would be say, yes, people that are committing a lot of crimes, they should go to prison. But in fact, what we do is something much different. We strive very hard to understand what is going on in their lives, what trauma they have, what mental health issues they're facing, and really what substance abuse issues might be driving their crime. We put together their cases, we work with our specialty courts, and we tailor plans specific to those individuals so that we can get to zero. We've recently added a data analyst, thanks in large part to the Commission. We appreciate that greatly. And that data analyst has really revolutionized what we're doing. And this is the future of prosecution, and it's really cutting edge. We're able to go through our own data and look at and really find individuals. And the numbers have been really shocking. And we have hundreds of individuals that we've identified. And so, normally when people hear data and I start talking about data, I see people fall asleep. So I brought some examples to talk about instead, because those tend to.
We love data here. Don't worry about that.
So one in particular that jumps out to me is a case that we found in Southeast Portland, where an individual was having hundreds of contacts with neighbors and people that lived in the area, businesses. And we found this individual had crimes that were from the range of robberies, home burglaries, assaults, menacing cases. There were cases involving weapons. And it was a situation where the neighbors actually had been probably contacting your offices, had certainly contacted the police, had contacted the district attorney's office. And when he came to my unit's attention, we immediately went into action. We contacted our Portland police counterparts, and we worked with them to develop what we have worked at through the years, a plan of action. And we were able to bring that person into custody. And despite the neighbors having actually been communicating amongst themselves how they were going to arm themselves and potentially have to shoot this person, which we all wanted to avoid desperately, we were able to resolve that case in a way in which he no longer threatens that neighborhood. And we took out, instead of having literally 100 cases and calls for services, it's down to 0. So it is one example that we see on a daily basis that we are working on, and we use on an everyday basis. But there are other really important core areas that my unit works on, and ones that are very pertinent, I think, to what's happening around this country right now. We have all heard and certainly been impacted by the events that happened in Buffalo, New York. And as tragic and as terrible as those are, unfortunately, the Pacific Northwest is no stranger to such political motivated violence and shootings. A big part of strategic prosecution's mission and job is to work on data, and that certainly is a core function, but we also deal with gun violence and political violence. And there are 2 cases I want to highlight to the commission so you understand kind of what we deal with. And the first one is one that sticks out, and I carry with me every day. And, on February 19th of this year, I responded to Normandale Park, and it was a very difficult day. That was a mass shooting that happened in our community. I was there, saw the carnage, the destruction that happened. I went to the hospital. I met with the family of someone who's made a quadriplegic as a result of this. And it was one that is something that we as a community, of course, find very difficult to deal with. But it is something that is a part of our reality as prosecutors. We've indicted that case. We're moving forward. I've met with each of the victims. I've spent countless hours on this case, and I continue to it. But unfortunately, as you've heard from D.A. Schmidt, this is a part of what we're dealing with, and this was the 4th separate homicide that I've responded to in 6 months. So it is one that is a tragedy, and it is, this office is at the very forefront, the tip of the spear, in facing down that violence. And the last case I'll talk to you about is one that I wrapped up last year and I did a trial on. It was one that of my 20 plus years of being a DA, I've done literally hundreds of trials. And this is the one case, despite having done some very serious homicide cases, some many robberies, I did a lot of child abuse cases. Despite all of those, this is the one that I have gotten the most emails, calls, attention that I've ever received, most I've ever seen out of this office. And that was the case of the state of Oregon versus Alan Sweeney. Mr. Sweeney was a man who was driven very much by his extreme ideals. He was so extreme, he got kicked out of the Proud Boys. And he came to this community when we were in the midst of our social justice movement, and which still goes on to this day, of course. But he brought a gun, he brought violence, he brought messages of hate, and he brought it to the community in a way that was so deliberate and so outlandish that it affected not only the hundreds of people that went down to confront him and dealt with him, but it also just the community as at large. And so we did a trial. It was very contentious. It was one that the jury heard our case and found him guilty. And it's a clear example of how this office, this unit, is at the very forefront, standing up to those messages of hate, how we're standing up to those individuals that would come to our community and try to spread that type of violence. And we will continue to do that, as unfortunately I have other cases that I will continue to work on. But as a whole, the Strategic Prosecution Unit is working daily on these and many more types of cases. So thank you very much for letting me share my experiences today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nathan. As Nathan referenced, we continue to get thanks from the community, because cases like that they tear at the fabric of our community and make everybody less safe. Next slide, please. Our third division oversees no major changes to there's some changes to the budget on this one. Oversees property and drug unit, which is our unit D, which is another unit that handles some of our most serious gun violence cases. The chair has proposed taking 2 of the prosecutors that we had received due to ARPA funds and making those ongoing funded by general fund. Those would be in this unit, in unit D. And then our multidisciplinary team is in this division. Next slide, please. So here is another slide, and this is a slide that we're probably aware of, but it's something that we track pretty closely. And what this is showing you is the number of victims of violence in our community. And those numbers at the top, 45, 62, 72, 79, those are compared from the same time period. So those are from January 1 to April 30th, which is where we currently are at with our data, obviously being in the month of May right now. So that is an apples to apples comparison of the number of victims that we've seen of violence in our community referred to our office. So you can see that we're on track in 2022 at this point to eclipse the number of victims that we helped in 2021. This slide also looks at the demographics, and you can see that if you are a male, you are more likely to be a victim of violent crime. If you're in the age group of 19 to 35, you are the most likely in those 2 age groups combined to be a victim of violent crime. And unfortunately, I have said multiple times that Black Lives Matter. You can see that our Black community is massively overrepresented in terms of the victims that we work with to get accountability for the crimes committed against them. Next slide, please. So significant program changes. Talked about the prosecutors in Unit D. It used to be in 2019, we would see on average our deputy DAs getting called out twice a month to assist at the scene of a homicide. Unfortunately, we are more on track to be twice a week. We don't have a significant increase of deputy DAs, so you can imagine that work is really concentrated in a smaller number of people who are doing a lot more of going out to the scenes of crimes to be with people in some of their worst moments, and the disproportionate impact that our community feels as a result of that. And of course, the other big significant changes that we continue to deal with in all of our units is addressing our backlog of cases as the courts reopen, and also in our multidisciplinary team unit who handles child abuse cases, the increase in reporting as children return to school. I have specific data on that if people would like to see it. It's a lot and I can forward it. But what we're seeing that as children do return to school, they're around mandatory reporters. We are seeing increases of reports coming in. And we know that that increase from that time when children were not in school and in that setting, that those reports will continue to come in over time as they get to see and be around more and more people. Next slide, please. So right now, I'd like to invite Senior Deputy District Attorney Melissa Marrero up to join me to tell you a little bit about what it's like as a leader in one of our gun violence units. Also, Melissa currently heads our domestic violence unit, but she's going to focus most of her comments on what it's like to be her.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Kafori, members of the Commission. My name is Melissa Marrero. I'm a Senior Deputy District Attorney, and I've been a prosecutor in our office for nearly 10 years now. You've heard a lot of positive things that we have going on at MCDA. Today, I'd like to speak with you frankly, about some of the current challenges and realities of working as a Multnomah County prosecutor in a trial unit at this particular moment in time. I've spent the majority of my career prosecuting violent felonies, sexual assaults, and homicides. I currently supervise a talented and very dedicated team of 7 attorneys comprised of 5 women and 2 men, as well as certified law students. And I need to tell you that we are at a critical junction right now. In my decade at the DA's office, I have never seen anything like the workload, the stress, and the urgency that's being felt by our deputies due to the uptick in gun violence, the uptick in homicides, and the backlog of cases that's been caused by the pandemic. It affects my deputies deeply, and it affects me personally. I carry a full caseload in addition to my supervisory duties. Over the course of my career, I have become accustomed to being awakened in the middle of the night to go to homicide scenes or to respond to major incidents that occur in our community. I too have sat in the hospitals. I've sat with victims who later passed away and their family members. I've sat with victims who are irreversibly harmed and injured. And I've personally seen the extreme value in being there in those moments, in being there for those people, in witnessing their pain, in observing those crime scenes for myself, and in gaining firsthand knowledge of the evidence in the cases that I later will be tasked with taking to trial. There is no question that this is a difficult job. What I'm talking about today is different. It's not that those are things we are asked to do. It's different than it's ever been in my experience. This work is critically important. I am so proud to be a Multnomah County prosecutor. I sincerely appreciate the recent investments that the Commission has made in our office and the recognition of the good work that we do. It's what has allowed us, frankly, to simply continue to function in these times. We cannot continue to do the work that we're doing with the resources that we have. We need help. I will tell you, I'm a mother. I have a 2-year-old daughter. She has started now on weekends asking me if I cannot go to work because she wants to play with me. I have a partner who's frustrated with the number of days each week that I come home after work so that I can do bedtime with our daughter to simply then turn around and go right back to work after she goes to bed because my workload is so high and the cases that I'm dealing with are so serious that I feel I have no other choice to do so. And if I don't make it home for bedtime, I might not see her during the week or my husband. I will tell you, I am not the only deputy district attorney who feels this way. And I am not alone in the amount of hours and the dedication that I'm putting towards this work. I have experienced heavy caseloads over my career. What we are experiencing in this moment is like nothing I've ever seen. But I do it because the victims need us, because community safety demands it. Because if I don't do it, if we don't do it, justice will be further delayed for these victims who have waited in many cases nowadays because of the pandemic, literal years for their cases to be resolved. And our victims are disproportionately members of underrepresented communities, of our BIPOC community, and they are having to bear this weight. The stress of an ongoing criminal case is very real. The victims are not only stressed about having to come to court and testify at trial, they are genuinely fearful for their safety. They're trying to heal from exceptional trauma, and they're living in a world of uncertainty that can be absolutely agonizing. I continue to do this work because I too worry about their safety. If we are unable to be responsive when crimes occur, offenders cannot be held accountable. Safety measures cannot be put in place and people can get hurt. People do get hurt. Our caseloads right now are such that our deputies' calendars are booked well into the next year with little to no break between scheduled trials. I've recently had to tell a rape victim that it will be nearly a year before I will have time to take her already years-old case to trial. And if I'm being honest, even then, I worry that I'm not going to have enough time between then and now to adequately prepare her case and to do her justice. I frequently speak with the mother of a homicide victim who is desperate for answers about her son's murder. He was killed over 4 years ago now, and I truly believe that if I had sufficient time to actively work this case, that we would be much closer than we are to figuring out who pulled that trigger, ending his life. Our victims are frustrated, and understandably so. The community is frustrated. They want answers. They want justice. They need safety. And they need to believe that there's somebody who cares and that what happened to them mattered. Our DAs are frustrated for our victims as well. And they're frustrated for not being able to do the work the way we know it needs to be done. Our current workload is being shouldered by our deputies in a way that is simply not sustainable. Deputies, myself included, have experienced health issues that they attribute to the stress and demands of this job. I have younger female attorneys who I've mentored who have questioned whether it's possible to do this job well and still have a family. And honestly, it's a question that's becoming more difficult for me to answer. The personal sacrifices that are being made by our prosecutors and their families and our staff members, frankly, is truly significant. This has always been a hard job. It's always been a busy job. It's always been a job that I have been exceptionally proud to do, but it's never been like this. We need the resources to be able to adequately do the job, to be able to respond to the needs of the victims and the communities properly, to be able to review and handle cases in a prompt and reasonable amount of time, to be able to prepare for those cases, and to uphold our ethical obligation and to provide fair, thorough, and deliberate consideration of each case, each victim, and frankly, each defendant. When I started my career, I was told to make sure that I never lost my moral compass, that we as prosecutors must always do the right thing for the right reason. Our prosecutors must be sufficiently resourced to have the time to figure out what the right thing is and to do the work needed to carry that out. Justice and safety cannot be achieved otherwise. We're proud to do this work. We are so thankful for your support. I thank you for your consideration.
Thanks.
Thank you, Melissa. It's hard to hear. It's amazing going to work every day with the folks that are so dedicated to this work. Next slide, please. In our final division, the only funded changes are tied to inflation. This is a division that oversees investigators and victim advocates. Next slide, please. I wanted to share some good news. I knew we'd need it after we heard from Melissa. Looking at this trend, you can see the work that our victims advocates are doing. Despite the fact that our prosecutors, when you hear about their caseloads and how high they are, you know that our victims advocates caseloads are also rising commensurately. And despite that, over the past, since July 2021, when we started tracking this data, they've been putting a focus on making sure that we get to victims of crime as soon as possible to have that first touch, that first contact. And you can see that when we started tracking this data, our daily average, was taking 10 days from the time that we took to get a case. And as we continued to measure it, that increased in September. And we all know that during the pandemic, it's been harder than ever to have contact with people. And since then, pretty much every single time we've measured this, it's gone and regressed closer and closer to almost being exactly when we receive the case, we're making that first contact. So the work of our victims advocates with our office, with our attorneys, who are making those contacts of victims so that they know that we're handling their case is very commendable. And you see there in March 2022, it's a -2. I thought that was a data error. So I figured, hey, somebody take a look at this. That can't be right. It actually is, because what that accounts for is something that Melissa mentioned. Sometimes our victims advocates are at the hospital with people before a case ever even makes it to our office. So of all the victim connections we're making on a monthly basis, in March, we actually got to -2 days before we even received a case. Clearly, there are cases, because this is an average, that go above and below that. But it's remarkable work that our victims advocates are doing. Next slide, please. So operational program changes. We've had a lot of movement in our investigation unit. We've had to hire an interim chief investigator. You're going to hear from Kelly Crone here in a second about his experience and the work that they're doing. We've been hiring additional investigators, and I'll let Kelly talk about that to help with our justice integrity unit and to prepare for body-worn cameras. Our victims advocates, as I mentioned, of course, their workloads are increasing like everybody else's. And you can see the number of victims that are going to be assigned an advocate and how many contacts that will be. And I should say the word contact really means a panoply of things. It can be a phone call, it can be in person, and it can be sending somebody a letter. But it's all of those things combined is what we're tracking. And you can see how many contacts that we're making on an annual basis. Next slide, please. So now Kelly Crone will be our final guest speaker for this part of our budget to tell you a little bit about what it's like to lead our investigative unit and to introduce one of our newest team members who I think you'll all be excited to meet.
I am Kelly Crone, born and raised in Montevilla neighborhood in Northeast Portland. 7 kids in the family. The magic of my parents was we didn't know we were poor, but we were. I worked for after attending Madison High School and Mount Hood Community College, I joined the Air Force for 5 years and then was hired out of the Air Force to work as a Portland police officer in July of 1981. I did that until 2007, working as an officer, a sergeant, and a detective. And in 2008, Mike Shrunk hired me as an investigator in the district attorney's office. And in 2011, promoted me to chief investigator. And I've worked for both Mike Shrunk, Rod Underhill, and now Mike Schmidt. And I've retired twice. And Mike asked me how that occurred, that I would come back. And I think you heard it from Melissa. When she spoke, I got word when I was working in my shop, I got a phone call from an old murder investigator that I worked with that said the DA's office was struggling with investigations because of COVID primarily, because of retirements, because of the demonstrations that often turned violent that gave nobody in the office really any time to address the need to rehire more people. And the murder investigator, Robbie Thompson, had an interest in returning to the office to help her friends, the prosecutors, with their murder cases. I initially said I wasn't interested, but then after a conversation with Jeff Howes and then Mike Schmidt, I agreed to come back to try to restore the investigative function in the office. And I agreed to come back from 3 to 4 months, and that was in December. So in that time, we've hired my replacement, who is a current sergeant with the Portland Police Bureau. He's going to start in July, so I'm going to stick around till he gets here. We've hired 4 additional investigators, and I've talked one investigator out of retirement for a short term. And then our most recent hire, Zuri Perez, we stole from the DC Metro Police Department in Washington, DC. She started work 2 weeks ago. She received a Ribbon of Valor for her work on January 6th, 2021. And we appreciate her having her here.
It's an honor to be here, and thank you very much. Like he introduced, I'm Zuri Perez, a former DC police officer for the 4th District. It is very important, the work that you guys are doing, especially for us as investigators to get the necessary help that we need to get out there and get victims and witnesses and make sure that their voices are being heard, because oftentimes I get told by them that they don't know if their voices matter, but it does matter, and it's very important and critical for us to make those connections and get them to the courthouse so that their voices are heard.
So we're lucky to have Zuri with us.
Welcome to the DA's office and welcome to Multnomah County. Great to have you here.
So what do investigators in the DA's office do? When I got back, there were 6.5 investigators, with 1 going out the door a month after I got back. When I was chief investigator in the past, we had 10.5 investigators. So we're, thanks to Mike and our HR department, we're back up to speed on the number of investigators. But what do they do out there for the lawyers? So I'll just use an example of a murder trial that just wrapped up yesterday. And about 3 weeks ago, Mario Moda, one of our prosecutors, called me to say, I have a case, murder trial going to go, and we've lost track of all our witnesses. The murder happened in 2017, but the courthouse had been closed. Our witnesses were all in homeless communities and impacted by methamphetamine use, so it wasn't going to be an easy task. So I took one of the investigators I recently hired, Matt Estes, who is a retired Portland police detective, and I said, go talk to Marrero and take care of this case for her. So Matt began to go through all of the homeless camps in Portland to locate our one remaining living victim of this homicide. And he put his boots on every morning, listed other investigators, walked the homeless camps, would pick up a box of Starbucks coffee and a bunch of cups, feed them their coffee. And in these camps, they know each other by first name and what color the tent is or what color the car is they're sleeping in. So Matt began to make those contacts, and in about 10 days, he found our witness. And we thought, he saved the day. But our witness, the last living witness to this homicide, was spending time in the hospital because he's also on death's door. And Matt put him up in a motel, made sure he was getting food and coffee, and we had him all set to testify. And Matt went to pick him up the day of trial, and he had disappeared. He had heard there was going to be a sweep at the camp he was in, and his truck was there with all his worldly possessions. So he chose to go recover his possessions instead of waiting for Matt to come pick him up. We kind of did a full court press and sent everybody out to try to locate him. We did locate him, and just like a made-for-TV movie, walked into the courtroom 2 minutes before his scheduled time to appear. We then got a couple of guilty verdicts after a hard trial, and 2 convicted for this murder. So the note the DA wrote when she did her assessment of the case afterwards was almost every one of the state civilian witnesses in this case was experiencing homelessness and struggling with methamphetamine addiction. 4 of the 5 witnesses present for the murder died during the pendency of the case. That's how hard it is out there on the streets. Matt Estes went above and beyond to make sure the witness was delivered, that we could deliver justice for the family of the victim. Tabitha Smith was the victim advocate on the case, and she maintained contact with the family during the entire process and was given great credit for the success of that case also, along with Portland Police Bureau. So I'll get to what we're asking for in this budget period. We're overwhelmed with body cams. When I left the Portland Police Bureau in 2007 as a sergeant, we were going to get body cams. 15 years later, we believe that they're really going to do that now. And so we'll shortly be overrun with body cameras. Currently, we have a lawyer, a legal assistant, an investigator, and a certified law student reviewing the body cams of Gresham and the Port of Portland. We think if we can get these 6 additional positions to review body cam, we will be up and running pretty smoothly by the time Portland goes into body cam mode. Mike also asked me, because several people have returned to the office. I've returned to the office. Robbie Thompson, our murder investigator, has returned to the office. A couple of lawyers have returned to the office. And he asked me why. And I said, you know, the world is broken right now. And we can't fix all of that, but I can fix this one little part of the investigations in the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office. I can fix that. And I'm a Portland boy who, no matter where I own homes, I'm from Portland. And I care about what happens here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Zuri. Next slide, please. In summary, next slide, please. So thankful for Chair Kafori's recommended budget. You can see that it incorporates a lot of the things that we've talked about today to make the Justice Integrity Unit, instead of a pilot, to have it covered by general fund ongoing, to add an equity leadership position into our office to work on equity and make sure that we're doing everything we can. The body-worn camera expansion that you've heard Kelly talk about, the Unit D violent person crimes is partially backfilled with some of the budget that we've had, but also ongoing funding in the next one down of $450,000 away from what it was with the one-time funding of the ARPA funds, and then increasing our victim assistance program also with some of the backfill that we were able to do. And so that all adds up to the totals that the chair is proposing to increase our budget. Next slide, please. So some general fund reallocations. We had some reduced staffing costs due to staff turnover. We have lost some very experienced prosecutors. Very experienced prosecutors get paid very well. We have, recruited, and Zuri is a great recent example of the success that we're having in recruiting and filling positions. We're really getting amazing people to come in and work for this office. Jeff House and I joke all the time that neither of us would make it through the hiring committee at this point because the quality of the applicants we're getting is tremendous. But that does come with us for a savings or a difference between the cost of personnel. And with that is estimated $708,000 of reduced staffing costs. And so we use that money to backfill some different positions. Our information technology, we've talked about some of the challenges that our IT team has. Salaries for lead deputy designation. A lot of our most experienced gun violence prosecutors are not quite at that level 4 management level, but nevertheless, they are the people that other deputies go to for help on how to handle some of their cases and the most challenging cases that they have, and they are our most experienced prosecutors. So we worked with the union. They negotiated a lead deputy designation into it, and so we took advantage of that to help with retention of attorneys. Internal service increases, just internal service costs that have increased for us. Some of that is IT related. Some of that is just other costs that have increased on us. And then the backfilling of FTE that was previously funded by a grant position that has gone away. So that gets you to how we used that allocation of reduced staffing costs. Next slide, please. The American Rescue Plan programs, you have previously funded our domestic violence unit caseloads, which with your increase there was able to lower our caseloads by 11%. And our gun violence, adding prosecutors to handle gun violence cases, allowed our caseloads to be lowered by 33%. And that is just by virtue of being able to spread the work around more. So those individual by attorney caseloads, because of those increased investments, were able to be reduced, even though, of course, as you all know, their caseloads are still at historic highs individually. So for 2023, it's proposed that the domestic violence position continue. And that 2 of the gun violence prosecutors continue, but that's because the chair proposed making 2 of those funded by general fund ongoing. So we're thankful for that recommendation. Next slide, please. We made it. Questions?
All right. Commissioners, I know that this is a lot and we've gone over our proposed time. So if there's, we have a stop at 1. So if people want to take care of their questions, and then as usual, if you have additional questions that don't get answered, please send them to Christian and we will have follow-up time. We'll start with you, Commissioner Myron.
That was really a great presentation and covered so much. And I know I will have absolutely additional questions. Actually, one thing to just as maybe put on the board or something, and I think we were going to be doing this in the context of the sheriff's office budget, but body worn cameras are a thing. Like there is so much there, and I have a tremendous number of questions. So I don't know if we were going to have another work session just on that or a briefing, but I would really like to delve into the body worn camera question. So it's Wayne. I don't know if Wayne is still here. But I really appreciated him being here, presenting the work of the CBAC and all of the CBAC members who have given so much time in this process. And I have to say, I personally support the MAP program and agree with their recommendation for that. And so I hope we will be able to consider that further in our budget conversations. And I really have appreciated, DA Schmidt, just, your focus on the big picture and on action and on innovation and really things like the Justice Integrity Unit. The way that you use and implement dashboards, the use of information technology, super brilliant, and it's the kind of thing that we should be doing across the county, because that information conveyed in a digestible way does a tremendous amount to increase transparency and trust of the public in the work we're doing and understanding of that. So I love that, to contrast with the ancient archaic form of discovery that you still use, that I remember from my lawyer days in the 80s or early 90s of being in a dark room going through thousands. You need to move into, I don't even know what century, to get your the discovery electronically provided. There's just so much you're doing, and that I loved here. The neighborhood programs, it's actually vintage. It's like we need to bring back the neighborhood programs, but they make such a difference. And just the individuals who are here today and that are in your office are so phenomenal. And I really appreciated all of your being here today. Kelly, I love that, just leaving us with hope. That is just a good way to be. And the juvenile unit and Lori telling us kind of the history and all of the things that are happening in there, and the transformational work that you're engaged with. And I just deeply appreciate that. And all of it, the stories, the real life that we're hearing about here. Nathan, speaking to you about that, and the real world impact on the families, our communities, and the frontline workers doing that work, the prosecutors and the people directly involved. Love getting to zero. There were so many things. It's like there's just so much here. Melissa, I don't even have any words necessarily. I so appreciated your expressing to us here, telling the story, because we don't hear that enough, and the impact is so profound and so real on the incredible people doing this work that serve our justice system and the victims and the defendant. It's I thank you. And then Kelly, my father-in-law was an investigator with the Long Island DA's office. So I've heard stories from back in the day, but I really appreciate your work. And in particular, talking about what we were discussing, I raised this question with our Department of Community Justice, the disproportionate victimization of people who are houseless, and what we need there in order to be able to proceed and give them justice as well. And it's wonderful to have you here. So I have the one question I have, aside from the big one about body-worn cameras, is in terms of victims advocates and that work, like you mentioned, around the houseless population. We did hear about a substantial investment in victim services and coordination with DCJ. Is there coordination there? Are you working together? How are you working together? Is there and work around that?
This question down.
Okay. Perfect. All right. I think that's it. They're so, and I imagine I'll be maybe reaching out to you as well. Thanks.
Commissioner Jayapal?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, DA Schmidt and everybody else. This was really an exceptional presentation, both in terms of the sort of the hard information presented, but also the telling the story. I know we appreciated last time, and I continue to appreciate the way that you've presented that information this time around. I want to thank Wayne and the rest of the CBAC for your time and energy and your really thoughtful comments. There's, as Commissioner Myron said, there's so much to appreciate in this budget. I want to call out just a few things. The Justice Integrity Unit, I was able to attend that first Senate Bill 819 resentencing hearing, and I was profoundly moved. You know, I think that is absolutely an example of how we create systemic change and we repair harm and we build the trust that we've all talked about. So that's, I know, just one example of all of the work that that unit is doing. So I really want to appreciate it. The dashboards, the transparency, the communication, appreciate the effort on wage theft. That is such an under-resourced area that has such profound impact on people's daily lives, and in particular on the lives of people who don't often get help from the justice system. And that is a way of using the justice system to actually materially impact people's lives. And you know, thank the chair's office for the sort of ongoing investments, moving some of those gun violence and domestic violence resources to ongoing funding. I also want to appreciate the really powerful testimony about the time that we find ourselves in, and the sort of I don't even have a word. Exigent isn't quite the right word, but exceptional circumstances that the community is facing, that your office is facing, that people are facing, your staff, your DDAs are facing on a personal level. As you said, Dia Schmidt, it was hard to hear, and it absolutely has impact. And, you know, I know you know this, and I'll just say that these are exceptional circumstances that we're facing across our systems, and that we are hearing those kinds of stories from our providers, our shelter providers, our homeless service providers. So it is, and that is by no means to minimize what I heard. It is, you know, I hear the level of sort of crisis point that folks are experiencing, and it absolutely has an impact. And then I want to appreciate you personally, D.A. Schmidt. You know, you were elected by Multnomah County voters on a very specific platform of transformation and change, and you're delivering on it. And you're facing some public blowback for it. And I just want to say that I appreciate the fact that you are you're acting on the very things that you were elected to impact. So thank you for that. I too have questions about body-worn cameras, and I'll just make a couple comments, and I'll send some detailed questions through Christian, but I would appreciate a conversation about the body-worn cameras. I know they have a lot of public support. I hear that the CBAC is very supportive, and that is absolutely something that I take seriously and keep in mind. And at the same time, I just want to note that I have serious questions about whether the size of the investment that we're going to be making, and this is just 1 year, it's going to grow over the years. I have serious questions about the size of that investment justifies the return that we get from it. From all of the information that I've seen, body-worn cameras have a marginal impact on the issues they were intended to address, which were changing behavior of law enforcement, because of the idea that cameras would, that understanding of accountability would change behavior, and providing a way to hold law enforcement accountable for when there was misconduct. That was the original philosophy behind implementing body-worn cameras. And I think we've gone very far from that. And I think the evidence is at best suggests that there's a marginal impact. So, it's become a train. It's a sort of a body-worn camera train. And the cost of that investment is just going to continue. And I fear that 10 years from now, we're going to look back on it as we look on some other investments that we've made in the criminal justice system and question why we made those and whether there weren't better uses for that funding. So just a couple comments on that. And then the last comment I'll make is I too am really interested and intrigued in the MAP program. And so I appreciate the additional information that you've provided, DA Schmidt, and I am looking into that and very interested in continuing that conversation. And again, appreciate the fact that, relevant to me is the fact that there's a lot of community support for that. So that is it. I'll send a few detailed questions on through Christian. Thank you all so much.
Last but not least. Oh, sorry. No, I forgot one. I feel so bad for her that she's sick. So bad for you.
No worries. We're getting through this. First of all, thank you so much, DA Schmidt, for this presentation and for all of the work that you've done in putting the budget together, first of all, but just in your office in general, and just the way that you and all of the folks in the district attorney's office have really responded to the outsized need for the work of your office over the last couple of years. I just really appreciate it, and I appreciate everyone that we heard from today who was able to share about the work in the different divisions. I just appreciate all of you, Suri, Melissa, Nathan, Kelly. I'm sure I'm missing some folks, but I'm just really appreciate that, and as well for Wayne from the CBAC, all of their work. I know we're really running short on time. I guess my question is, the body-worn camera issues, Commissioner Jayapal really dug into some of the issues. For me, it's the piece of it with the requirements around the FTE hours that are needed just to review the footage. It seems, me coming from my background, I'm like, isn't there a technology answer? Like, is some kind of like algorithm that could like review the footage and like highlight things? And it's just such a huge investment and really, finding out, really understanding what the outcome and what the benefits of doing that are, is just something, because I agree, this is something that we're talking about this year at this level, but will only grow over the years. So I think that's just a conversation all of us are interested in having. And then I think the other thing is just, I appreciated the focus that you had on where, as you were making your budget priorities, and how you were making determinations about it. I hear loud and clear that the caseloads right now are just overwhelming because of the increase in gun violence, because of the increases that we're seeing across the county in violent crime. And so just getting a better understanding, and I'm happy to have this conversation with you directly about this, but where these investments are really making a difference, either in that caseloads or in the gun violence, including with the MAP program. I think that it sounds like a really interesting program, and I want to really make sure that I understand the correlation of the impact that we'll have in serving the community in different ways, especially around some of the things that we've heard of as the biggest roadblocks right now, or the biggest issue. So we can just look forward to that conversation. And with that, I will end it. Thank you.
Commissioner Stegman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, DA Schmidt and your entire team. I guess, I think much of what I had to say has been said. The overall message that I hear loud and clear is that you all are tired and exhausted and overworked, and it is simply not sustainable. So I just want you to know that I've heard each and every one of your voices and appreciate just the magnitude of the work that you do and how important it is, and frankly, how unsupported you're feeling at this moment in time, which brings me to my question, and we can talk about it when we have another work session. But while I do support the MAPS program, what I'm hearing from you all is you just need more prosecutors. You need more investigators. You need more support. So that is a conversation I would like to have about, it sounds like, the efficacy of the MAPS I really like, but maybe we just need 4 more full-time prosecutors, and would love to hear your thoughts about that. And then around the body cams, would love to know the legality, because I don't think we get to vote whether Portland Police has body cams or not, but we have to deal with the review of the footage. And is there any potential for funding elsewhere? Like, I don't think so, because Gresham did it and we just had to pay for it, right? So I'm not sure that that's something that we even get to have a decision in. So anyway, I just really, a heartfelt thanks to all of you for doing this incredibly hard, important work, from victim services to just some of the most horrific things. Nate, it's good to see you, and it's just overwhelming. And and I know that you all are on the receiving end, and I can't help but think about prevention and about our Transforming Justice project. And like, if we don't get upstream to turn the faucet off, things are, frankly, I don't know that we could throw enough money to stop just the overtaxation of your office. And so this is not a sustainable model. And so we have to get ahead of it. And I look forward to doing that with some of our other partners. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone for coming this morning. Pleasure to see you all in person. And that concludes our budget work session for today. We have another one coming up next Tuesday, May the 24th at 9 a.m. And that will be the Joint Office of Homeless Services. And then I didn't get a chance during our board meeting to say this, so I do want to say it publicly, that Tim Scott and the Multnomah County elections team are the most amazing group of people. I would put our elections team up against any elections in the entire country. I have to say, reading about all the shenanigans that are going on across the country and even some here in Oregon just makes me so proud to be a Multnomah County employee, and so grateful to Tim and his team at the elections office. I know you all are working really hard and even helped me during this election cycle. So I just want to thank you so much. And with that, we are adjourned.